Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Happiness Journey with Dr. Dan podcast, where every journey is worth living. My name is Dr. Dan, and I'm your host for today's episode. I am a bilingual cognitive behavior psychotherapist specializing in anger management issues, both court-appointed and private, marriage counseling using the EFT method, dissociative disorders, narcissistic personality disorders, depression, anxiety, dream analysis, and also provide life, business, and retirement coaching support. I provide individual one-on-one session in English or in French, and also do group settings. If you need any assistance, reach out to DMV therapy and coaching services at 301-325-1550, and our website can be found at lifecoachddanamzallag.com. Today, I'm very excited to have for our sixth episode of season 8, a very special guest and author, Terri Kozlowski. And just like every of my past episodes, I will leave it up to the guests to properly introduce themselves, as no one can do a better job. Terri, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dan, for having me on your show today. I am a child of trauma. I was sexually assaulted when I was 11 years old, and my mother was the person that propagated this because she was a drug addict and an alcoholic. And we were on a summer visit because my dad had custody of us. And so it was a very traumatic time for myself. I was 11 at the time, and I was taking care of my sister, who was 11 months younger than I was. So all of a sudden that summer, I became an adult because I was paying bills. I was making sure my sister and I had something to eat in the morning and had dinner in the evening. And then my mother would drink and sleep and drink and sleep and do drugs and sleep. So it was something that I had to learn to grow through and immediately figure out, okay, what is it that I need to do to take care of my baby sister? And that became the reason, and the ability for me to get out of that situation was the fact that I had to protect my sister, so she was not also going to be traumatized the way I was. So that is where I started. So over the course of my years, I have gone through different things that have propelled me into a much happier, more well-adjusted individual. And I ended up writing a book a couple of years ago called Transcending Fear, which is my personal story and the 6 steps I went through to overcome my fears. Because when you are a child of trauma, everything about life is reacting from a place of fear.
That's okay. So, and when was it published, Terri?
My book was published last year.
Last year. Well, congratulations for that, by the way.
Thank you.
Now, what are the 6, if you could just give to those who actually gone through a very similar trauma, not necessarily about child abuse, but anything else? What are the 6 main steps, as you mentioned on the book, to be able to help them cope through that process?
The first one is one that's a little surprising, which is take responsibility for your actions. And what I mean by that is, although trauma happened to me, how I reacted to any of it afterwards is my responsibility. So I was reacting poorly. So for example, in college, I had a friend of mine tell me that I got something out of playing the victim. And, I was still I was 18 at the time, and I was really upset. Like, who are you to tell me anything about my victimhood? But I realized this came from a place of love and a concern for me. And it made me take pause and actually look at my life and say, okay, what am I getting out of saying that I'm a victim? Because I was vocal enough to say that I was traumatized because I had triggers, and I didn't want somebody to accidentally trigger me and me be negative or physically harming somebody because of my triggers. So I sat down and I thought about it. I journaled about it. And I realized that when you say you are a victim, lots of things change about how people deal with you. Now they get quiet. They're not quite sure what to say to you. They start walking on eggshells, or ultimately what they end up doing is leaving you alone. And that's what I wanted, is I wanted to be left alone. But I figured out at the age of 18 that there was probably a better way for me to communicate what I needed from others than to say, I'm a victim, so leave me alone. And so taking responsibility for my actions moving forward is the first step. And it leads to step number 2, which is then when you are a victim of trauma, you feel like you have no control over your life. But when you take responsibility, you automatically gain back of your life, because then my mother, the people that caused my trauma are no longer the people in the forefront saying, do this, do that. It's really about, okay, Terri, now what are you going to do? So the best story I can give is when I finally spoke to my dad about what happened. He was very wise, and I didn't realize how wise he was years later. But when I was all done telling my story, he asked me, now what? And I didn't understand what he meant. But looking back, I realized we spend so much time looking for the answer to a question we will never get, which is why? Why me? Why did this happen to me? What did I do to cause this? We look for all those whys. And the reality is, we're really not going to ever find the true why. And even if we do, it will never satisfy me, because the reality is the why was my mother was an alcoholic and a drug addict. That's why. Does that give justification for what happened? Absolutely not. It doesn't justify any of it. And there's no reason that will justify traumatizing a child. There just isn't. Therefore, when you focus on the why, never actually get to the really important, which is now what, which is what my dad was trying to point out to me. Now what? Yes, this bad thing happened. Now what are you going to do about it? Is there anything you can do about it? Now, my dad specifically was asking me, did I want to press charges? What was it that I wanted to do? Now, at that point, I was already in counseling. I did get off the airplane and walked up to my dad and said, I need counseling. So I knew enough. I was an aware enough child to know that this was bad. I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know how to put it into words, and said, I needed therapy. Well, what 11-year-old asked for therapy? Okay. So I was an aware child, and I spent a lot of time in therapy until I was about 18 years old. And part of that was because it was happening in the mid 80s, actually early 80s, they really didn't know what to do with me, because at the time, child sexual abuse wasn't talked about. So I wasn't being asked what happened. They didn't have the dolls to say, they didn't have any of that. The tools that they have now are so much better. So I spent a lot of time understanding what people wanted from me. They wanted me to say I was okay. So I put on a mask that Terri is okay. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter what's going on inside of me. To the outside world, Terri was doing okay. And I played that role and had that mask on for years. And one of the things that's interesting is I think all of us have some sort of, I think a lot of times now it's happening quarterly, but all of us, those of us that are older, that midlife crisis is really about us saying, dang it, I hate the masks and armor and roles and labels I have that aren't me. I want to be authentically me. And we start stripping those off. And I think that's really what a midlife crisis is realizing that we became something that our parents wanted, or we're doing something because that was what mommy and daddy wanted us to do when they sent us off to college. And instead of really pursuing that which was burning in our soul to do. And that midlife crisis is us coming to a realization that the only way for us to be happy is to be our authentic selves. And understanding that and becoming aware of that is really what the healing journey is about. It's about understanding that we were always whole, despite the fact that many times I felt broken, many times I felt that I was in pieces. The reality was, if I really looked hard at the situation, the reason I felt that way is because when you put masks and armor and labels and roles on, you fragment your authenticity. And that is why you feel that way, is because you are not being your whole authentic self. And learning to take off those masks and armor is really, I think, what a healing journey is about. For anybody to become happy, they have to go ahead and peel away these layers that they put upon themselves or others put upon them, the roles they took on that they were never meant to take on, things that we do so that we can do a horrible thing, which is conform to society. Mm-hmm. We were never meant to be like other people. We were always meant to be our individualistic, unique, different selves. And the only way for us to truly be happy is to be that authentic self.
But that is actually a good point. But when you look at most people, they hide behind a mask because they feel like they're in a cocoon. They feel protected. They feel safer. So for them to be able to peel off this layer that you talk about, the mask, what kind of courage or what kind of realization did they have to come forward to be able to say, you know what, I'm not happy with what I see in front of me, and I need to change that?
If you really look hard, let's just, Dan, do you want me to put a mask on for your guests, or do you want me to be my authentic self and us to make an authentic connection and to truly, when they see the show and they see us communicating, they say, dang, those are real people talking about real subject that affected their life. That's what you're looking for. Mm-hmm. And when we ask others, do you want me to wear a mask or do you want me to be my authentic self? They're all going to say they want us to be authentic because that's what everybody wants to be. But we're afraid. The ego, the egoic mind tries to protect us. And when you are a child of trauma, that egoic mind just explodes into all kinds of areas it never is meant to go into because it is trying to protect you. And when you're 11 and you don't understand that everybody isn't out to try to get you, even because, think about it. My mother is the one that perpetrated this harm on me. So if you can't trust your mother, who can you trust? Exactly. Okay. So there becomes this whole dynamic where trust becomes a huge issue and everybody is out to get me. My mother didn't protect me. Who's going to protect me? But at the same time, we have to realize that I have had more life experiences that people are kind and gentle and loving than I've actually had that were harming.
I see. Now, are you still there, Terri? Because I think you froze here. Okay, I think we are actually having. Okay, I think we're having some technical difficulty here, Terri, because you froze for a little second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes. Oh, I think it must be either one reception. But in your program or in your book, do you teach people how to forgive what they went through, like in your case?
Yes, that's one of those steps, is understanding that the forgiveness process, number one, isn't about anybody else but you. And it's about your ability to disconnect from the trauma, disconnect from the hurt, disconnect from that anchor holding you to the past. Forgiveness cuts that. And it's so that you can be free. It has nothing to do with the other person, because if you hold on to that anger, you hold on to that resentment, you're stuck in the past. You're looking backward, and your future is not backwards. It's not behind you. It's in front of you. And so part of that process in forgiving is then to realize that although my mother, and I did forgive her, we never did reconcile. And there has to be an understanding that there's a difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. Forgiveness is that cutting of the cord that binds you to the other person. Reconciliation is when that other person realizes that they harmed you and they seek your forgiveness. There's a difference. Reconciliation is a two-part process. They have to recognize they've done something wrong. They have to seek restitution with you, some sort of way for you to bond again or start over again. And for many people, reconciliation never happens. And reconciliation never did happen with my mother.
Okay. So yeah, I was just about to ask you if usually they go hand in hand with the forgiveness and reconciliation, especially when you have a motherly connection with someone in your family. You have more. I mean, especially after you grow up, I think because you're 11 years old at this point, and as you grow up, I think your brain matures differently, and then it allows some things that happened in the past to stay in the past. But yes, I guess in some cases, reconciliation should never happen because that person, do you feel, I mean, that was actually another question. Do you feel that the reconciliation part allows the other person as well to feel that they have not the authority, but also the right to reenact what they've done in the past? Because they feel that, okay, they forgive me once, we reconciled, I think I could do whatever I want again.
If they're truly seeking reconciliation, then they know that that's not part of what's supposed to happen.
Okay.
Reconciliation is supposed to be about making sure that you're not going to harm that person the same way you did, but that you learned your lesson too. Yes. That there's a lesson for both parties, and making sure that the perpetrator is the person that understands that this isn't about me giving you another chance to hurt me. This is about you realizing you made a mistake.
Okay.
You recognize you've made a mistake. You're looking at correcting that mistake, and you still want to have an authentic me. And as we move forward, I'm going to have personal boundaries in place so that there are going to be ways to test you to make sure that you are not actually just trying to reuse and abuse my ability to forgive you.
Now, when you come and you mentioned as well that you're a life coach before we started the recording of this podcast. So do you focus primarily with people who have gone through something similar as you did, or you deal with all kind of post-traumatic stress disorder that happened in the past?
I do all kinds of post-traumatic, because the healing process for me, I see is very, very similar, because, most trauma occurs in the past and we stay stuck in that past. We stay stuck in a pattern. And until we recognize that that pattern is harming us, we can't move forward. And I've dealt with people who have actually had post-traumatic stress syndrome and have completely recovered, because they realize that when you live in the present moment, in this exact moment in time, everything's okay. And most people live in the past, which means they are depressed, or they live in the future, which means they are anxious. But if you live in the present moment, everything's okay. Everything's okay in the present moment. And by trying to maintain that present-minded awareness, you end up realizing, by the way, you can't live in any other moment but the present. Correct. You can't redo the past. You can't try to do things in the future in the present moment. Everything can only happen in the now. And by living in the now, by being aware of the now, you understand that moving forward, your future is created in the present moment.
Actually, there was an author, Eckhart Tolle. He wrote a book, The Power of Now. The Power of Now. To learn how to be mindful and stop focusing too much on what happened in the past and stop anticipating or predicting what can happen in the future. So now it has actually a very good, profound statement or message that he wrote. And but in the case of when you go and help people, and those who actually suppress their feeling from what happened in the past, and they try to forget, not necessarily forgive, as you mentioned before. Is that another way for people to cope with those feelings about forgetting what happened and just ignoring them, or they will resurface eventually?
They will always resurface. And this is why. At some point, something will trigger you. At some point, something will trigger you, because you may think that, okay, I'm over this. Things are moving forward. I'm doing well. Or because I never did, if you just bury it. And interestingly, my mother is somebody that buried something. She buried her own traumatic past, and she never dealt with it, which caused her alcoholism.
Oh, I see.
Okay. So the reality is, when we don't deal with something, we find other ways to cope, whether it's going to be with substances. So my mother chose alcohol and she chose drugs, whether it's food, because food is an acceptable form or exercise or workaholism. All of, these are the acceptable things that you can do that, then it comes across very differently. Then you're productive, and then, all that good stuff. But the reality is, you're still stuffing. You're still not dealing with the past. And it may not necessarily be that you have a negative past. It just means that you may have patterns of behavior that are generational, that, your grandfather thought this, so your dad thought this, and they've passed this on to you, and it's not necessarily true for you. It may have been true for them, but you carrying on their truths because it's tradition doesn't necessarily mean that it's good for you, or that you should be passing that on to your children. And that, that is part of, I think, what we're seeing in today's society when we look at racial issues. That's a very, very generational thing. Older generations have more difficulty with racial issues than younger generation. And that is a good example of how we pass things on without ever realizing. And when we look at that, sometimes the unlearning process of something that we learned as a child is just as important as learning new things.
But now, when we are adult, do you feel that we cope with stress differently than when we were younger because we didn't know the signs of stress, we didn't know what they meant, but now because there's so many more options available at this time and age that meditation or going to do some kind of like resort where you go and you just like do like a set of meditation for a whole weekend or whatever it is. So do you think now it's easier for people to be able to cope with stress what they used to do before?
I'm going to say no, and this is why, because people don't deal with stress. The reality is most people, you have those people who are aware and those people who take on that meditation or journaling or prayer, whatever that they do to ground themselves. Those aware people may have a better recognition that they are, but a lot of times their language and how they speak, I have no time, I'm so busy. Well, that is the exact opposite of staying grounded and being mindful, is when you start projecting into the universe those things that you don't want to be. There's more than enough time for me to accomplish all I need to accomplish today. I start that as a mantra every morning because I set myself up for success in my morning time. I have the first hour of my day is Terri time. It is uninterrupted, and I read, I journal, and I meditate. I do mantras. I write I am statements, and my I am statements set me up for the day to understand that my day is going to be easy. Us living a life not supposed to be one of striving. It's not supposed to be one of surviving. It's supposed to be thriving. We're supposed to be happy individuals, that things come easily to us. And the only way for us to do that is for us to be in flow with the universe. And to be in flow with the universe means we have to be fully present in the now. We can't be stuck in the past or worried about the future, because that is not where inspiration comes. That's not where innovation comes. That's not where creativity comes. All of that comes in the present moment.
But would you agree, Terri, that everyone here now in society are surrounded with so much negativity that is going on, wars, the inflation, and the real estate market, and so on? Mm-hmm. Do you feel that we try as individual, we try our best to better ourselves from day in and day out, but because of what's going on around us, we absorb this negativity and we let it linger inside of us for too long? So if we're trying to move to do 2 step forward, what's in our direct environment pushes us 3 step backward. So we're always in the negative. We always seem to be running on a treadmill, but where are we headed?
I kind of disagree with that. I do agree that the world surrounding us is quite negative. And as long as we feed ourselves that negativity, we're going to stay, just like you said, 3 steps back. But the reality is we are responsible for our energy. We're responsible to make sure that we are not in the negative and that we are at least neutral, if not in the positive. And we do that in several ways. One is starting your day by grounding yourself. Mm-hmm. And then when bad things happen, when you get bad news, when you hear, you put on the news and you hear all the negativity, you pause when you're done. You pause and you take 3 deep breaths, and you get your autonomic nervous system to automatically calm you down. Because when you take 3 deep breaths to the count of 5, inhale to the count of 5, hold for the count of 5, and exhale for the count of 5, 3 times in a row, your autonomic nervous system automatically starts up, and it actually lowers your blood pressure and helps calm your breathing. So you physically calm down. And by doing that, you allow yourself to pause and say, hey, yes, all of that is happening, but that's not what's happening inside of me. And understand that the peace that everybody seeks isn't in the world. It's an internal. It's a spiritual aspect of your being, is the peace. That's also where joy and happiness come from, is an internal thing, not an external thing. Therefore, if I ground myself, then the peace rises from within me. When I ground myself, happiness and joy rises from within me. And we allow ourselves to be present where everything in our immediate world is really okay.
So what is the best way, Terri, to face fear and to not let fear dictate our present and future behaviors?
That for me, it's really understanding where that, and all fear comes from the same place. Ready? This is big. Your ego is meant to protect you. So its job is to see bad stuff everywhere. So it is also why our brain is wired, physically wired, to see the negativity around us, not the positive. It is the reason why we remember bad things better than we remember happy moments. Our brain is wired that way. Therefore, if we are aware that that's the way our brain functions, then a fear rises and we say, okay, I'm scared. I'm going to give an example that really illustrated for me. I had the three men that raped me when I was 11 were Hispanic men. So I obviously have a good reason to fear Hispanic men. And I went to college and still had issues with Hispanic men. And I would, sit up in the front of the class and, in front of the teacher, trying to make sure that if something bad happened, I was going to have an out. And then I got into the workforce, and guess what? I had to work with Hispanic men. And when I actually got to know some Hispanic men, they were very nice, loving people. And I had to recognize that can't, based on three men, all Hispanic men on the face of the planet. That's kind of wrong. And when I look over the history, I've only had one experience with Hispanic men, and the rest of my life has been positive experience with Hispanic men. But guess what? My ego will still bring up, hey, there's a Hispanic man walking down the street. Yes, he's with his wife and 4 children. I don't need to be concerned about that Hispanic man, but my ego is going to point that out to me because I've had a bad experience. And now I say to my ego, thank you for pointing that out. I can dismiss it because it is not relevant to my current life situation. And it really is about understanding. And when you recognize that the goal of the ego is to forewarn you of a potential problem, you can then dismiss it because it's not relevant. So for when you are a child, those things that are scary, spiders, snakes, the reality is when you're an adult, you may not like spiders, but they're certainly not scary. You understand that they are part of the world, part of nature, and they have a purpose, and they kill things that you don't like mosquitoes. Yes. Therefore, you don't need to be afraid of snakes or bugs or anything like that. You can, if they're in your house, not kind of want them there. There's a difference. But if you are in their home, if you're out in the woods and are walking and you come across one, respect the fact that they have a purpose there as well.
That is so true. And do you agree on the acronym FEAR, which is false evidence appearing real, as many mention, or is it something that is constructed by the mind that is something that is not really there, but just based on past memories?
It is based on past memories. So I do believe that acronym works well for most people, but it really is based on past experiences or lack of past experience. If you've never done something and you're trying something new, that fear, I want to call it something different. I don't want you to call it fear. I don't want you to call it anxiety. I want you to call it excitement. You are excited to try this new thing because something inside of you is propelling you to move towards some goal. And guess what? If you have a goal, you haven't reached it, which means you haven't done it before, which means it's a new thing, which is scary, but it really isn't scary. It's exciting because it's new and it's adventurous. And that's part of what makes our happiness journey so much fun is the journey process, not actually getting there. When we achieve our goal, guess what? We look for another goal. So it's next. What's next? Yeah. So that being the case, it's the journey that is so important to us. And to obtain any goal, the journey is where we find our happiness. The journey is joy. The journey is where we learn. It's where we grow. It's where we overcome. And it's that journey that we go through in everyday life that makes life so wonderful to live.
That is so beautiful, Terri. Now, where can our listeners find you?
You can find me at terrikozlowski.com. You can listen to my podcast, the Soul Solutions Podcast.com, and my book is Transcending Fear.com, which is available on Amazon.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, Terri, that is all the time that we have for today's podcast. And I really do appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedule to join us. And thank you again for participating and inspiring our many listeners with your incredible story. Now, we hope that you have all enjoyed today's episode. And I'm also very excited about the many upcoming guests that we have scheduled for season 8 of the Happiness Journey podcast, filled with inspirational stories just like the one that you listened to today. Now, here are some concluding words of wisdom. An entire sea of water can't sink a ship unless it gets inside the ship. Similarly, the negativity of the world can put you down unless you allow it to get inside of you. We're surrounded with naysayers, day in and day out. Most are trying their best to put a stick in your wheels so you do not get that opportunity to move forward in life. The naysayers are too afraid to see you succeed while they are still stuck in their mundane life. They hate to see success in others because they refuse to see success from within. They project their own insecurities into you because it is all they see when they look at themselves in the mirror. Ambition is like their kryptonite, and they will do whatever it takes to make sure you do not reach your destination. Question is, how do you get rid of them? Well, for starters, do not share anything of what you do to anyone, and just keep on pushing on your goals until they hear from the success you achieved. Action speaks louder than words, so do so with your achievement. Let them hear your voice. My name is Dr. Dan, and you may all pursue your amazing journey in life.